Do we know who's joining us by telephone today?
All right. I do not.
Okay. Didn't know
Okay.
if they wanted to say hi
That's
or
okay. 8:05, that we used to be up in Santa Barbara. I don't know if it still is Santa Barbara area, but okay. So,
Danielle.
what's that?
Danielle.
Oh,
Danielle.
oh, hi
oh,
Danielle.
you're incognito tonight. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So all of that will be faithfully captured both by the recording and AI companion. So, page 102, cultivating heart attention. This will be the second of the prompts of these 12 prompts that will finish up the book. And before we dive into the text, was there anything from last week, anything during the week that you've been chewing on that you wanted to bring up at this point? All righty then. Looks like it's full speed ahead. Um, Last week we did beholding. And so beholding, I suppose we can most simply understand, is the experience of something without naming it. I think is the most plain and simple way that I can uh, try to put my thumb on this concept of beholding. It's the experience that we have, it's the encounter that we have, whatever it happens to be, but without thinking about it, without naming it in our head, stopping the interior monologue about something that makes us, it turns us into subject and object and separates us, but allow us to completely immerse in it. We talked about the sensory walk, or the contemplative walk that you take, and we read in that ebook on contemplative practice about just being able to experience everything through all five of our senses, focusing on those senses one by one and putting it all together, but again, without naming it, without the interior monologue and the labeling that goes on naturally in our minds. So from beholding, remember, these are going to be 12 different prompts or practices, as he calls them, simple things that we can do that can help us to start putting together our own contemplative practice, not just as a formal prayer practice, but actually as a lifestyle to integrate these into our lives. So this is what's going on in this last section of the book. So now let's talk about cultivating heart attention. The Syrian deacon, Evagrius Ponticus, who first wrote about the 8 of the sins that eventually became the Enneagram, saw them as ways in which our heart presence is suffocated. Do remember that most ancient teachers in all religions did not associate heart with sentiment or emotionality as we do. For them, heart was the centering, integrating, and grounding place of both the independent head and the rebellious addictive body. A much later mystical teacher, G.I. Gurdjieff, saw each of the capital sins as an overdoing or a passion. In other words, ways of self-forgetting that turn us away from our true self. Robert Sardello, in his inspired book, Silence, offers many simple practices for attending to heart, which help us remember true self and return to full presence and authentic life. We will return to him again in the sixth practice. Sardello teaches, along with many others, that the easiest way to enter the heart is through silence. We enter the silence by simply going to a quiet place and sitting, eyes closed, until we feel the embrace of the silence. And frankly, it silences us. We are then in an inner region, often called the heart, where we have to yield in order to experience any further depth. Learning best happens when calmness and inner safety rule. Then, with practice, sometimes taking years to develop, sometimes occurring right away, we can find our way into heart presence even in the midst of great turbulence. The practice of silence is ongoing and never perfectly mastered, for she is endless, and it does often feel like a feminine quality. Every time we lose our inner silence, it is not to be seen as a failure, but as a concrete opportunity to re-choose it. When we have fully entered the silence, we can place our attention at the center of the heart. This does not mean that we are thinking about our physical heart at all. Let's use the less subtle image of your foot. You can pay attention to your foot, and it appears to be over there. You're really thinking about your foot. Instead, Sardello teaches placing your attention within your foot. Notice that this is a radical switch in perspective. The whole world now unfolds and reveals itself from this place of my foot. Whatever attention is, whatever it is within, there you are. And from there, you see differently. That place is not as egocentric as looking out from the mind. You can do the same with your heart. Know from your heart, not about your heart. Place your attention within it. Observe, notice, sense the qualities of your heart space. You will know you have entered it because it will feel as if you are within a vast spherical space where you cannot find a boundary, an ending. It is a feeling of both intimate infinity. Say that 12 times. It is a feeling of both intimate infinity and infinite intimacy. There is warmth, all warmth. You feel encompassed, held, embraced. You find that you are within heart rather than heart being inside you. It is deep, and you will not want to leave. I wonder if deep love for anything is possible if we have never dwelt there, at least for a few moments. When you feel this expansive warmth, you can let it resonate through your body until perfect calm comes. Feel the inherent, always present blessing return again and again. It never really goes away from you. You only go away from it. Okay. Any initial thoughts? Anything jump out at you? Takeaways?
Another one of those chapters that I've got to read it a couple times to absorb it. There's a lot in it.
Okay. Well, good for you. That's exactly what we're going to do right now.
Thanks, Dave.
You're so welcome. Anytime.
Is that foot for thought?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wasn't sure.
The discussion where he put, you find that you are within heart rather than the heart being inside of you. I remember we had a discussion like this in one some months back. I'm sure it was from this book or another Richard Rohr's book, but we were discussing God is inside of you, but rather than inside of you, God, you are in God. You are within. God is within us. Because I remember saying He's coursing through my veins. It's not that God is in my heart. He's coursing through. I remember that discussion.
Mhm.
That was the metaphor.
Yeah. And that sounds like a kind of a vague distinction, but it's really not the way you're putting it, Ellen, because we can think of God being in my heart, and we can still think of God being a completely separate entity who is somehow encapsulated there, right? But what you're talking about is that he's coursing through our veins. He's just part of us. That line between us and him is non-existent, really. We are one. And to get that distinction, to be able to experience or encounter that distinction is what contemplation is all about. So it's a big difference, just conceptually. But we start conceptually, and maybe that's as far as we go because our concept shelves us from even trying to go further into the kind of intimate connection, in the kind of oneness, or the kind of connection that communion, Eucharist implies, that we're actually ingesting into ourselves all that God is. So it's an important distinction that you're making. All right, well, let's do Scotty a favor and let's go back to the beginning and let's read it again. And let's start
Thank
to
you.
break it down. So the Syrian deacon Evagrius Ponticus, who first wrote about the who first wrote about 8 of the sins that eventually became the Enneagram, saw them as ways in which our heart presence is suffocated. How many of you knew that the Enneagram was dealing with sins? All you Enneagram people, Kathy, Billiam, did you guys know that?
Yeah, they associate a sin with each number that you generally respond to. The dark passion, I guess they refer to. I don't know, William could probably speak better about it, but yeah.
Okay. I want to get into it a little bit because I think it'll help us. But yeah, it's interesting that the Enneagram is dealing with these passions, these 8 basic ways, I suppose, of dealing with our reality that are like personality traits. They're not the Enneagram is really not a personality trait indicator, but these 8 sins, the 7 deadly sins plus 2, are the ones that were used as the basis of the Enneagram. Do remember that most ancient teachers in all religions did not associate heart with sentiment or emotionality as we do. Yeah, especially even in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew culture and thought. The heart, lebhon, was this center of vitality and the center of action, the center of even decision. It was really very different than the way that we look at heart today. Um, more in terms of these feelings of affection. For them, heart was the centering, the integrating and grounding place of both the independent head and the rebellious, addictive body. A much later mystical teacher, G.I. Gurdjieff, saw each of the capital sins as an overdoing or a passion. In other words, ways of self-forgetting that turn us away from our true self. So really, this self-forgetting, if you think about, I've often made a big deal about the first Greek word for Eucharist was actually anamnesis, and you may have heard me talk about this, which literally means unforgetting. So if amnesia is forgetting, anamnesia or anamnesis is unforgetting. And it seems like, well, then why don't you just say remembering, right? But I think unforgetting really captures it more than just remembering. To unforget who we really are, which is the whole point. Who we really are is our true self. When we experience the true self in contemplative practice, and the egoic mind is temporarily out of the way, and we can just be completely present, and we feel that connection with ultimate presence at that moment. That is the unforgetting. The idea of communion, taking into ourself and actually having it course through our veins, as Ellen was talking about, of God's essence and character and everything that informs choice. That's that unforgetting. That's how we remember who we really are. Now, these passions, these overdoings, are coping mechanisms that we put in place because as small children, we get hurt, we get abused, we get neglected, all these things. And so in order to restore some sort of chaos, some sort of control to the circumstance, we have these ways of creating these programs for happiness and survival that become core beliefs that long outlive our childhood. And these become these passions that then become characteristic ways that we deal with our reality, which is what the Enneagram is hopefully showing us and bringing light to. I wanted to share my screen here and show you this little article here on the Enneagram sins, the 7 deadly sins of Christianity plus 2. So if you take a look at 1, you've got wrath. So you number 1s, Kathy. Wrath is your deadly sin. 2 would be pride, 3, deceit, 4, envy, 5, greed, 6, fear, 7, gluttony, 8, lust, and 9 would be sloth. So I know William is always talking about his sloth in his 9ness. So do you all know which 2 of those 9 are not the 7 deadly sins? Which are the plus 2?
Fear.
Yes, Fear is one, and
I
the
think
other.
wrath. Wrath is the other one, right?
Nope, wrath is one of the seven deadly sins. So you got
Oh,
one of the seven deadly ones, dear.
I thought
no,
it was
actually, well, yeah.
Deceit?
Deceit. So deceit and fear, 3 and 6. That's the +2. So the seven deadly sins were wrath, pride, envy, greed, gluttony, lust, and sloth. Those are the seven capital sins or deadly sins. And they're basic failings of human character. Deceit and fear were also added. As we look here, the Enneagram sins relate the seven deadly sins of Christianity to the passions of the Enneagram personality types. Because there are only seven deadly sins, but 9 personality types, the Enneagram sins are also referred to as the seven deadly sins +2. During the 1970s, the Enneagram types found their way into various Christian communities. A number of pioneering teachers and authors had their introduction, blah, blah, blah. I don't think we need that. There was one thing I wanted. This Enneagram passions and virtues down here, I thought this was an important paragraph. The passion is an indicator of how stuck or fixated we are in our Enneagram type. As we begin to work on ourselves to find freedom from the limitations of our Enneagram type, the passion begins to subside and the virtue begins to appear. To me, that's such an important sentence because often we take a look at the Enneagram as if it's a picture of our finished product. Oh, Myers-Briggs, that's my personality type. I'm an extrovert. I was born that way. I'm going to die that way. No, we're supposed to be working past any limitations that the Enneagram brings to light for us. And as the passion begins to subside, the virtue begins to appear. So when you take a look here, these Enneagram type 1, passion, anger is an energy that corrects and improves what's unacceptable. It's primarily directed at myself, blah, blah, blah. But the virtue, the flip side of anger would be serenity, which appears when you become more accepting of things as they are instead of demanding things as they are instead of demanding that they meet your standards of how things should be. And so as you look through the Enneagram types, pride, its flip side is humility, deceit, truthfulness, envy, equanimity, avarice, detachment or non-attachment, fear, courage, gluttony, sobriety, excess, innocence, and laziness, action. And so we can see that each one has a flip side. So what we're talking about here in terms of contemplation and cultivating this heart attention here is that what we can call them, these seven deadly sins, I suppose, these passions, these overdone ways of coping with the difficulties in life, are covering over. They're causing us to forget who we really are underneath all of that programming. And what we're trying to do as we enter back into the heart space, as we start to cultivate this kind of awareness and attention, is that we can step aside from all of that and we can remember, we can unforget who we really are, which is the whole purpose of the spiritual journey. The whole purpose of Jesus' way is to unforget who we are and to reconnect so that we can say that we and the Father are one. And from that position, then anything and everything really becomes possible. Any comments on any of that? Is that kind of square with Kathy, what you and William?
Yeah, it does.
Well, I tend to have shied away from labeling, especially now that especially with my daughters, my girls, because I've noticed with some families, oh, she's the athlete. She's the reader. She's the one that's good in math. So you've labeled the child and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What if the reader is also good as a dancer? You don't know. But then the focus became, oh yeah, she's the reader. And so this child, perhaps, oh yeah, I'm good in reading. So you practice that muscle and became stronger, but you never developed the other side of her. That's why I shied away from these labels, especially with children. And we do see it too in our, the kids we see in our clinic. You may mistakenly label somebody ADHD, but they're not. They were really something else. But then there's that self-fulfilling prophecy. See, that's why he was doing all these, because of his ADHD. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was too smart and he was bored with the saying the ABCs. Right?
That's
Yeah,
a
I
great,
mean,
that's another
I
great,
think
go ahead, Kathy.
you make a good point, Ellen, too. And I think there's a general guideline around something like a Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram or any type of instrument like this that you probably want to be somewhat wary of doing it with children that are too young anyway to begin with. There's a kind of a certain, adult age that they can look at doing this kind of thing. But when we're presenting this kind of thing too, we always look at it as it's a tool that goes in your toolkit. It's not one label that just says you are this number, that's all you are, because that could be dangerous for someone. So it's really just another avenue for you to learn about yourself that you can kind of put in your toolbox of life, really. So it's kind of a combination of looking at all the different things that you've learned. So that's what I like about it. So more from an adult perspective too, but I can see with the children labeling, how kids label each other too, or whatever, that's dangerous. I'm sure that's probably tough.
Yeah, one of the thoughts about the Enneagram, I forgot who said this, but he said, this is not about putting ourselves in a box. It's about taking ourselves out of the box we're already in.
Perfect.
So becoming aware of our stuck habits, whatever that looks like. These are the ways. So as we pivot from passion to virtue, like that's how we basically release ourselves. And I think there's some school of thought that suggests the healthier we get, the less we look like our type. Is that accurate? Or Kathy, do you know if that's true?
I think the more aware we are, that's for sure. So I don't know if you shy away from your type in general. I mean, I think we have all of the numbers, but we tend to default to one number particularly, or maybe with that wing, we would default to those. But I think you're definitely more aware, and you know your triggers much better, just like you spoke of.
Oh, go ahead, Brady.
A different take on this is when I was in grad school, I had a professor named Charlie Leaf who his research was in genetic epistemology. In other words, that you kind of come out of the box pre-programmed. And it was consistent with what you're talking about in terms of what you see in children. You can see in very young children certain characteristics, certain ways of organizing their information, organizing their world. And so I went to Charlie once and I was kind of complaining about this and saying, what's the point of therapy? Change if we're kind of coming out of the box that way. And Charlie said to me, he says, Brady, he said, it's clear to me that you're OCD, the way you dress, the way you conduct yourself. He says, if that's ever a problem for you, the answer is not to be different, it's to become very good at it. So in other words, know it. So for instance, Beth knows this, but everything in my office was always this way. Everything in our home is this way. Everything that is hanging on the walls, pictures, mirrors, etc., are all hanging on two nails. And the two nails were applied using a level. Because if it was tilted, it wouldn't bother me. But since it's not tilted, I look relaxed. I look calm. I don't look OCD at all until I start to do certain things. But I think it's the same kind of thing. It's just kind of know who you are. Don't let it be a problem for you. Find a way to find it. Maybe you can find strength in it or find aptitude in it.
Yeah. It's funny, as you were talking, Bill was raising his hand, but
I saw that.
my first thought was, well, Bill's not OCD, he's just an architect. But on the other hand, he might be an architect because he's OCD. Ever think of that? So that would be being, making the best out of his OCD-ness that he possibly could, turning it into a profession. That's great. I think, the main thing here is And the beef that I have with a tool like the Enneagram is when people use it as a definitive statement of who they are. And I think William had the perfect, it's not just showing you the box you're in, it's showing you how to get out of the box, or however you put that, William. That's
Mhm.
such an important point that is sometimes glossed over in many of the treatments of Enneagram that I have heard. And I think really the idea is that we're supposed to get to the center of the wheel. To me, that's where we want to end up. And if any of you have any of you had DISC training before? DISC, it's a workplace training, like HR lady, of course, has.
Mhm.
And so the four quadrants stand for dominant, influencer, stability, and conscientiousness. And so four different ways that we can work within the workplace. So it's kind of along the same sort of lines that we're talking about here. But the interesting thing is when you take their standardized test, they actually plot you in the center of this force pie chart, and there'd be a point somewhere where you actually ended up in your quadrant. But how close are you to that quadrant? How close are you to the other adjacent quadrant? And most importantly, how close are you to the circumference or to the center of the wheel? Because that tells you where you are. The closer you are to the circumference, the more you are embedded in that particular trait. The closer you are to the center, the more that you carry all the traits in some sort of balance, but still dominant in this one area. And so I think if we were to chart ourselves in our Enneagram through contemplative practice, we may find ourselves migrating from the circumference closer and closer to the center of our particular quadrant, or maybe migrating, between our wings or whatever it happens to be. But I think that's really what this is all about. Contemplation can help us to do that. That's what this is all about. Because contemplation gives us the perspective that we're never going to get if we are inside our melons all the time. If we're inside that sphere, then all the reality that we have is what's being projected from our minds. To step outside of that and be able to see this other perspective, that's what allows us to start breaking the mind's hold on us. And now we can connect with this deeper reality. Now we can see how we can start to use the mind as the tool that it is for our interface in this life, but be able to exercise this balance. And then I think our plot point is going to start migrating toward the center. But that's the most important thing. Yes, people can change if they're willing to go down this path. That's the key. Obviously, the older we get, the more we get set in our ways, the less likely change or major change will occur, but it still can for anybody at any time, especially when we are hit with great love and great suffering or loss. That is a catalyst for much of this change because that is intense enough to pull the curtain back for a moment, and we have to deal with life as it actually presents. Let's see, where were we? So he starts talking about Robert Sardello in the second paragraph in his book Silence, offering many simple practices for attending to heart, which help us remember true self and return to full presence and authentic life. And he's going to talk more about him later. Sardello teaches, along with many others, that the easiest way to enter the heart is through silence. Why would that be? Why is silence so incredibly important to this process? Would you think?
Every sound takes your mind to a thought. And we're trying not to be taken back. We're trying not to let those thoughts take us in all 55,000 directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when there's not silence, you get silent within yourself and just shut it all out. But just sitting out in the backyard, okay, bird, I'm going to behold. Like this week, I practiced beholding. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening to the birds, okay, and I'm trying not to name the birds, but I'm hearing one over there that I know what that one is, and I'm hearing one over there and I know what that one is. And I'm hearing a car, a car revs up and I know, oh, that's a Ferrari. Oh, that's a
Isn't it amazing the way the mind and then you say, oh, that's a Ferrari, and then you're way down the line fixing Ferrari engines or something in like seconds. It's just the way the mind works.
Well, or it's some knucklehead driving it at 6 a.m. in the morning and letting it really throttle really loud. That's what I think. And that's not in here either.
So you're talking about exterior silence, which of course is important to establish an environment in which we can start to develop the interior silence, which is really the most important piece. You know, creating an exterior silence is helping us by creating the soup in which we can now start to most effectively develop an interior silence. But we can carry an interior silence into a noisy environment and be just as still.
Dave,
And we want to be able to
Dave,
do
I,
that
I
eventually.
remember riding on Metrolink. I was perfectly still and yet I was moving.
There you go.
You know, it was, I could feel the rail underneath me, but I was still, I was able to get quiet. And it was funny, there's something about that clickety clack of being on the rails that it just dawned on me, you know, I'm like, I'm moving at 50, 70 miles an hour, and yet I'm perfectly still sitting in this seat. It was kind of cool.
So if you think about it, what is the primary noise in your head consist of? What does the primary noise in your head consist of?
Concerns.
Voiced and expressed how? It's all word-based, right? We're thinking in words. Everything is a word. We're naming things word after word after word. So if we want to really enter this heart space that he's going to define more thoroughly in a bit, then it's going to be through silence, which means we have to stop the flow of words. Words are what bring us back to the egoic mind, back to the intellect. It keeps bringing us back. You hear the car sound. Now, if you really were in choiceless awareness, the car sound would come and pass through you and go on without having to stop and actually think about it and name it and identify it and do all the things that we do. But once we're on that train, then we've completely left the heart space. That's why stepping away from the words is the most important thing. You know, that the genius of Chuang Tzu, you know, the purpose of words is to convey ideas, but once the ideas are grasped, the words can be forgotten. Show me the person who's forgotten words, they're the one that I want to talk to. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to the point where we just stop the flow of words, and interiorly we can sit in that silence. And that brings us into the heart space. So he says, we enter the silence by simply going to a quiet place and sitting, eyes closed, until we feel the embrace of silence. And frankly, it silences us. And that's a really important distinction to make as well. Because if you spend your time in any kind of contemplative practice trying to silence your mind, well, you're just at diminishing returns and you're cooked before you even start. We don't do this by directly trying to wish the thoughts away, to push them down, or to repress them in any way. We just show up and allow ourselves to be embraced by silence, and it silences us. That's why it's so important for us to realize that we are displacing all the noise in our head by putting our full awareness into the moment, not naming the moment, but we place it in the moment. So when Bill is out in the backyard and he's looking at all the birds, if he is just engrossed in the shape and the color of the birds, then that displaces all those words. And for that moment, he's in that space. That's what we're trying to do, but we don't exactly create the silence. We create the perfect environment for the silence and allow ourselves to enter into it. It's different. It's not the usual way that we go about acquiring something that we want. And it's an important distinction to make.
Dave, aren't we also trying to quiet the emotions? I mean, they're drawing a distinction that the heart they're talking about isn't the emotions either. So the emotions can be just as disrupting to the silence as our thoughts.
So yeah, if you're being triggered by an emotion and you're feeling it, what does that typically do? Well, it causes a thought stream, right? If you start thinking about the emotion. But you can do the same thing with the emotions as you can with a thought. It's the flotsam that is flowing down the river. You notice it, you own it, but you don't grab onto it. You just let it flow by. And it's amazing, even an itch on your leg or on your neck, it's amazing how the skin just starts to, I mean, it's almost like withdrawal. you're detoxing and this stuff is coming through your pores and everything starts to itch and everything. It's amazing what can happen when you just purpose to be completely still and silent and in solitude. But if you just notice those things and let them go and don't fixate on them, they will have their own little lifespan where they will rise and then they'll fall again. And just let them go. But yes, it's going to be all that interior content, Bill, all of that stuff.
I like what you said about the words there, Dave. Richard Rohr, I forgot which book he talked about the idea that words are naturally dualistic. So like soon as we put a word to something, it's not this other thing. We're back into this naming the 10,000 things kind of space.
Yep.
Rather than so I like the silence as the gateway to this.
That's exactly right. As soon as we name something, it's this and not that, you know? And when we don't name it, we're just part of it. Completely different experience. We are then in an inner region often called the heart, where we have to yield in order to experience any further depth. There's that idea that I was trying to get across earlier. We yield to it. We don't create it. We don't force it. We don't acquire it by sheer force of will. We yield to it. We allow it to happen to us. We enter into the silence. We intentionally don't name, but the silence then silences us, as Rohr puts it, or we yield to it. Learning best happens when calmness and inner safety rule. Then, with practice, sometimes taking years to develop, sometimes occurring right away, we can find our way into heart presence, even in the midst of great turbulence. And so there's Bill's example of being on the rails, and he's moving, he's aware of the moving, but internally completely still. If what did Rudyard Kipling say? If you can keep your head about you when all about you are losing theirs, then you're a man, my son. That's that idea that we can carry our stillness with us into turbulence, exactly the way a scuba diver carries air into water. And we can carry our environment around with us. That's the whole point of what we're doing, not just to get good at it in our prayer closet in solitude, but to be able to go through life now defined by silence and solitude and stillness and simplicity. That's the whole point of this. So yes, that's what we're trying to do. We can carry that heart presence with us. Once we get good at finding it and maintaining it, the technique of doing that, now we can carry it with us wherever we go. And from that place, we can make the best decisions, loving decisions for everyone that we meet and encounter, because we're coming from that silence and we're not just reacting to our passions and our overdoings that will be the tail wagging the dog.
So what do you think of these? I hear about bird watchers and they go into this place where they are, I don't know, to me, it's like they enjoy it and it's quiet and they contemplate, but then they name the bird or they name that song and it brings this satisfaction. Is that a different type of contemplation?
I think it's both, Ellen. Remember that scene, that scene at the end of Walter Mitty, where he finally meets the photographer up on the mountain and he's about to shoot and the leopard finally comes into frame. Well, are you going to take the picture? Are you going to take the picture? Sometimes I don't. If I really like a moment, I don't want the distraction of the camera. I just want to be in it. Even if you are out in the woods as a bird watcher and you've got your journal and you've got your camera and all this and that, you can still oscillate between the two. And I think that's the key. If you're out there and part of your experience is to, document what you have seen and draw or whatever, even in the drawing, you can be completely in a contemplative state, even as you're drawing. Artists, of course, know this, that state of flow. Even as you're shooting in the camera, you could be in that state. Obviously, you have to think and you have to name things, but that's going to be this oscillation back and forth. And let's be honest, we're not going to be able to get into a contemplative state of choiceless awareness and just stay there, steady state for the rest of our lives. It's never going to be that way. We're going to be oscillating back and forth, but there should be the balance. There should be, and we should have the ability to flow intentionally back and forth, like Brother Lawrence, be able to conduct our day in God's presence, intentionally in God's presence, and for the most part do that. But even Brother Lawrence himself, of course, had to pop out and start to think abstractly and conduct business. So I think you can have the best of both worlds, you know. But on the other hand, if you went out there as a bird watcher and your whole purpose is to capture more birds than Johnny down the street, well, then you're cooked before you begin, right? If you bring that kind of agenda to the whole thing, then it becomes a whole different thing. Now it's a competition. Now it's a prideful, egoic process rather than just the joy of being in the woods, in that environment, and you see what you see and you document what you document. So it has so much to do with what we take into the process. The practice of silence is ongoing and never perfectly mastered, for she is endless. And it does often feel like a feminine quality. And I think that's really important for us to remember as well. We're never going to be finished products. We're never going to be perfectly silent, but we don't have to be. 51%. That's the beginning of it all. And we'll take off from there. But there's always another corner to turn. That's where our divine dissatisfaction and our blessed unrest fits in to this prospect, because there's always something more. We never get complacent. We never are finished. We are always turning another corner, experiencing something new. And so this practice of silence is ongoing, never perfectly mastered. Every time we lose our inner silence, it is not to be seen as a failure, but as a concrete opportunity to re-choose it. This is so important to see, I remember Keating saying basically the same thing, that every time that you lose your choiceless awareness, lose your complete sense of silence, and now you're thinking again. He says, make sure that you don't start to go into recriminations. Make sure you don't start beating yourself up that you just can't do it. Just look at it as an opportunity to come back to silence, to practice coming back to, another opportunity to practice my recovery time, to practice coming back to silence. Remember Edison, Thomas Edison? Supposedly the legend goes that he failed 1,000 times at trying to make a light bulb that actually worked. And he says, I didn't fail. I learned 1,000 ways how not to make a light bulb. Can we do that here? It changes everything. I think I've told you the story before when I had a computer problem at one of my office jobs. It was actually NCSR again, where George and I worked, and I worked up and down and sideways trying to fix this computer problem. Finally, I gave up and had to call the geek squad in, and so this guy comes in with his pocket protector, and his tool belt and all this stuff. And he sits down and I tell him what the problem is. And he looks at it for a second. He goes, wow, I've never seen this before. It was the coolest thing in the world to see my problem, because when he was done fixing this problem, he would have another arrow in his quiver, right? For me, it was the biggest problem in the world and just frustration. For him, it was an exciting opportunity to learn how to fix something else. It's all about the attitude that we bring to this, and it can change completely the experience of our contemplative sits, whatever they happen to be, whether it's meditation, centering, prayer, or just bird watching or gardening in the backyard, or whatever it is that we do. If we can have that kind of attitude of adventurous spirit about it, it'll change everything. Every time we lose our inner silence, it's not to be seen as a failure, but as a concrete opportunity to re-choose it, to practice coming back to center, to practice recovering. When we have fully entered the silence, we can place our attention at the center of the heart. This does not mean we are thinking about our physical heart at all. So important to get that. If you're thinking about it, you've left the building. Let's use the less subtle image of your foot. You can pay attention to your foot, and it appears to be over there, or maybe down there, right? Might be better. You're really thinking about your foot. Instead, Stardello teaches placing your attention within your foot. Notice that this is a radical switch in perspective. The whole world now unfolds and reveals itself from this place of my foot. Wherever attention is, whatever it is within, there you are. And from there you see differently. That place is not as egocentric as looking out from the mind. Is that's it's a subtle distinction, but it's a really another really important one. You know, to be able to place our center of attention somewhere other than the mind, because that's where we habitually reside, day in and day out. That's where we live our lives. Everything is here. We're thinking from in here. If we can let that attention descend down into the heart, whatever we understand that to be, and we're seeing from there, that changes everything. And it's wordless, of course. We're not thinking about it. We're just seeing from there. It's our perspective is coming from a different place. It's just another way of saying, of course, that we are stepping aside from our thoughts, but it may be a more concrete image and way for you to be able to achieve just that, you know, to let Henry Nouwen put it this way, it's when the mind descends into the heart and proceeds from there is what the hesychastic prayer, the prayer of the heart is all about. The mind descends into the heart. And so if we can do that, if our center of being kind of moves down from intellect to pure presence, maybe that can be a help for you. And now he says you can do the same with your heart. Know from your heart, know from your heart, not about your heart. You know, we're talking about the I-thou relationship again, right? Not an I-it relationship, not subject-object. Whenever you're thinking about something, you've created an object, and you are separate from that object. You're at least arm's length from that object. Taste and see that the Lord is good, is what the psalmist says. That's a whole different trip. You know, as we talked about, tasting is the most intimate thing that you can do. When you put something into your mouth and you ingest it into your system, talk about being vulnerable, right? You take that sip and it's got poison in it, you are completely vulnerable. You're cooked. There's really nothing you can do. You know, that is our most vulnerable place, is to put something in our mouth and actually ingest it. Taste and see that the Lord is good. We can see from miles away. We can be completely safe. We can be operating the drone that does this and that from a completely safe environment. But if you're tasting it, you're on the front line. If you're tasting it, there is no defense for that. And that's the whole point of this. You can do the same with your heart. Know from your heart, not about your heart. Place your attention within it. Observe, notice, sense the qualities of your heart space. You will know you've entered it because you will feel as if you are within a vast spherical space where you cannot find a boundary, an ending. And as soon as he used those words, I was immediately thinking of a black hole. And the universe from Stephen Hawking's point of view, where he said the universe is finite. Okay, it's not infinite, it's finite, but it has no edge, which means the entire universe is like a black hole. So from wherever you start, you'll end up back where you started, however far you go, because you're like an ant traveling the inside of a ping pong ball. You can't escape it because you're inside it. So you will know that you are inside this heart space because you'll feel like you're in this vast spherical space, but there's no boundary to it. And every point mathematically in the universe is exactly the center of the universe because it has no edge. And every place in the universe will look exactly the same in terms of the star field. You know, this is, again, the theory that's being propounded here. It would be equal density and distribution of stars wherever you look, wherever you are in the universe, because every point is literally at the center of the universe, because no other point makes any sense. And so it's so analogous to being in God's love. In God's love, every point is exactly the center of God's love, and it looks exactly the same, equal density and distribution, degreeless, undifferentiated, you know, indiscriminate. And so what he's talking about here immediately called those kind of astronomical images to mind for me. And it's a feeling of both intimate infinity. That's pretty cool. Because usually when we think of infinity, we think of vastness and something remote. But this is intimate infinity and infinite intimacy. It is a feeling of both intimate infinity and infinite intimacy. There is warmth, all warmth. You feel encompassed, held, embraced. You find that you are within heart, rather than heart being inside you. And that's what we had talked about that Ellen brought up when we first read this. But what I was thinking about as I read this sentence was I'm thinking about Brady, your death experience, of course. You know, that just rocketed off the page there. When you move into this place of this heart space, egoic mind is no longer differentiating, naming things, saying this and not that. Then you're in this place of warmth, all warmth, encompassed, held, embraced, that you are within heart rather than heart being inside you. There is no differentiation anymore. All is one, all is connected. And there is that feeling of being held and embraced. And yeah, you're made to know stuff, but it's not in words. It's not in a way that is this and not that necessarily. So it's a whole different experience. And it would be nice if we could have the intensity of the experience that Brady had, but we're going to have to die to get it. So maybe you don't want to go there, but we all can have that experience in contemplative practice. That's what it's all about, is practicing for the moment of our death by practicing stepping aside from the mind that we're going to leave behind at the moment of death. And that does wonders for us in terms of our view of life and death, taking away our fear of death, or a lot of it, because we know that every time we step away from our mind, what we feel is warmth, all warmth, encompassed, held, embraced, within heart rather than heart inside us. That feeling, and every time we go there, we have the same experience. That's where the trust starts to come in. It is deep, and you will not want to leave. And then he poses this question: I wonder if deep love for anything is possible if we have never dwelt there, at least for a few moments. And of course, he's answering his own question. When you feel this expansive warmth, you can let it resonate through your body until perfect calm comes. Feel the inherent, always present blessing return again and again. It never really goes away from you. You only go away from it. And so this is our second prompt. The first one was being able to, in more of an online way, as we go through our day, and Bill was great because he said he's been practicing it this week. Online, in your conscious stay, in the daylight, you are trying to see without naming. Stop the flow of words, but you're still going through your day and experiencing and doing the tasks at hand and whatever it is that you have to do. In the second prompt, this is more offline. I suppose it could be online, but really what we're talking about is taking time to really sit in silence and develop that technique, whichever works best for us, of being able to step aside from the internal thought stream and be quiet interiorly, even if the exterior environment is not perfectly silent, but to seek out exterior silence as much as possible as the environment for us to be able to develop our interior silence as well. So we have these first two prompts, one online and one offline, to get us started. All right. I think I'm out of words. Any thoughts or comments or impressions about any of that?
Just right. Go ahead, man.
So I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and the guy said something along the lines of silence is the gateway to spirituality, right? And I like the way when you explain that returning to silence, that slipping back into silence, as like just picturing that gateway that connects us back to the spiritual realm. And also just your thought that the first language of God is silence. You know, like I like all of that ties together.
There's a
Yeah.
quote that I love, and I can't remember who said it. But it goes like this: Man seeks rest, and I think, well, never mind. Man seeks rest and removes obstacles to obtain it, and having gotten it, immediately flees, for it falls upon him the things of the past or the things of the future. And so it's like you think about mankind's activity to distract him from his troubles. And you think that when he's not distracted, he moves to a place where there's no silence. It's just noise. And so the next thing to do would be to find a way to quiet that noise and find a place where he could rest, where we can rest. Anyway,
Yeah.
I would like that quote because I see people who just cannot bear silence, rest. It's just too difficult.
That's most people.
I remember our pastor at the church that Marion and I and George and Scott were all at. If you had a silence, just a break in your sentence of more than a second and a half, he had to jump in and fill the silence, usually with a joke, but it was just almost compulsive, that you couldn't let that silence lie. He had to jump in and fill it with something. And in fact, even here, sometimes the silence feels really loud. And I remember Danielle telling me to honor the silence, and that was really important for me to hear because, it was like, yeah, it's okay if 4 or 5 seconds of silence go by, because sometimes you're still forming your thoughts, and it's okay. Just let that lay for a while. And then if nobody speaks, then you can re-enter the conversation. But don't be drawn just by your compulsive need to fill the silence. Just kind of let it lie and see where that kind of leads, because it can be really interesting where you come out of that silence. And so, yeah, honoring the silence has become a really good phrase for me that I have to keep reminding myself when I'm feeling compulsively like, oh, I need to fill this. There's a gap here. Oh my gosh, we're losing the energy. Gotta go.
And the irony of that when we're doing a contemplative kind of process, right? Where you're trying to, like, we should be spending more time in silence, right? Just part of our process and slowing down a little bit more, maybe.
I remember Bob Lang, my good friend Bob Lang. Most of you know him. He died, I guess, over a year ago now. Anne's husband. He had a very different cadence in just his normal speech pattern. If you remember, Bob, especially over the phone, it was so hard over the phone, especially when I was first getting to know him, because there'd be these huge gaps, and I'd want to jump in and help him to find the word or do this or do that. And I just learned, just let him be. He'll catch up and he'll finish it. A little easier in person because you could look at him, but on the phone, it was almost excruciating sometimes to wait for him to rejoin the thought. But I just got so much better at it. I can really thank Bob for helping me to relax and enjoy even the silence. But yeah, it was tough.
If anybody's heard Eckhart Tolle speak, he has long pauses, very long, and you're like, waiting, and it's just, it seems, forever, and then this incredible, the words that he says come out, but he's one that can definitely handle those long pauses.
Worth the wait, though, right?
Yeah, it's worth the
Yeah,
wait.
worth the wait. Yeah.
You know how I learned to be silent? When I close somebody in a sale, and then I give them the closing question, and then I have to be quiet because the one who talks first loses. So I had a guy, I'm not kidding you, 5 minutes this went on, and he goes, "Hey, you still there?" I go, "Yeah, I'm here." Right. And it's awkward because we're not programmed to be like that. And it's still awkward for me. But anyway, I ended up closing the guy, but it was like, I just hang up. You know what I mean? Once, so that's what I learned about silence. But, what does it say in Psalms to be still and be quiet and know that I'm Lord and I am God, or I'm the Lord, right? So, and every time I hear that, I always think about laying on like a doctor's table, right? Waiting for him to come in to be examined. And that's when I'm silent, but I'm not silent because I'm like freaking out, like what's going to happen, right? So that's the thing that I always think about. So I have to get a different picture in my mind. Maybe Psalm 23, like makes me lie down in green pastures, right? By still waters and stuff like that. So anyway, it's hard
That's
to
good,
do.
George.
Huh?
That's good, George. Good stuff. Good stuff.
No, but it's hard to do.
I know it is. We're not acculturated to silence anymore. Everything is against us in terms of contemplative practice. It's unfortunate because, in other cultures and other times, the culture can be an ally in your silence and solitude, but not here and not in our lives. And so we're just going to have to realize we're going to have to be salmon. We're going to have to swim upstream. And that's just the way it's going to be. So we're at a disadvantage, but we can still overcome. So just remember that.
Yeah, but it takes
All right.
practice for sure.
We better shut it down for the East Coast's sake. But this was a great discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Very
Scotty.
good.
Thank you, God, for the silence. Thank you for the connection that silence creates. It opens up a channel of connection that's not possible when we're letting our mouth dribble out word after word after word. So, Lord, I pray that we embrace the silence and learn what your intention was for this silent communication. We find ourselves sometimes frustrated by it and not understanding it and why it's important. Yet it exists, and we're here to explore it. So we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the opportunity to continue learning and journey through life and explore all that is possible because you are possible. We love you, Lord. It's in your name, Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens. Amen.
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 All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you Sunday.
Hey, guys.
I'll see you
Everybody.
online.
Holy
Bye.
week
Good
begins.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Holy week begins.
Yes, it does.
Bye.
Good night, good night, good night. Good night, everybody. Good night, Jordana.
Bye. See you
Good night,
Sunday.
Judy. Oh, no, you're Serenity, aren't you? Serenity. All right. See you on Sunday, dear.
All right. See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.